On today's episode of the S.B.R podcast, we'll be joined by Paul Morrissey. Paul is joining us from across the pond, where he's the head of media and communications for the Queen's Park Rangers Football Club out of London, England. Join us today as we'll be discussing Paul's role with Q.P.R and other fascinating aspects of the English Football League. So if you're either a football or soccer fan, global sports fan, or maybe just happen to stumble across this channel, I want you to do two things for me right now. First of all, don't forget to subscribe below for more information and video content from Sports Business Review. But secondly, enjoy the video and don't hesitate to provide any feedback in the comment section below. I hope you guys enjoy. On today's episode of the S.B.R podcast, we will be joined by Paul Morrissey. Paul is joining us from across the pond, where he is the head of media and communications for the Queen's Park Rangers. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me on.
No, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us here. It's going to be kind of a different take on things. I think most oftentimes we have American sports business personalities, so it's great to have you. So you are the head of media and communications for the Queen's Park Rangers Football Club of the English Championship. And any British football supporter knows of the storied history the West London club has had since really the firm's inception in 1882. So why don't you describe to our listeners what Q.P.R means to the W12 district of London?
Okay, so Q.P.R have been in the area and actually at the stadium, which was Loftus Road. It's now Kyan Prince Foundation Stadium, but we've played at that stadium for over 100 years now. And what Q.P.R is a huge community club. It's very proud of the importance it places on the work that it does in the local area and beyond. And it has a very real connection with its local community. And a lot of its fan base have actually moved out of that area, if you like. But while Q.P.R has grown, it has remained very, very entrenched in its local community. It understands that playing a game of football for 90 minutes is just one part of what the club does. Don't get me wrong, it's a very, very important part, but it is only one part of what the club does. The club does a lot more than that and has a far bigger role, as do all football clubs, not just in London, not just in England, all clubs everywhere. One of our co-owners, Ruben Nanalingham, he's actually the co-owner of LAFC as well.
Okay.
I was fortunate enough to go out there a couple of years ago to a game, and it's incredible seeing how LAFC has grown in such a short period of time, and the fans there are so passionate. And you look at that, and it's just, you think how quickly that football club has had an impact on its own community. It just highlights the importance of football clubs in its region, and certainly that's the case with Q.P.R in West London.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think one thing that Major League Soccer is missing, and I agree with you. It's incredible what they've done out in California. Is kind of that rivalry, right? I think that, the firms established over there in English Championship, Premier League, they've all been fighting each other, whether it's league play or FA Cup play. Who is Q.P.R's main rival? Would you say? I know you guys kind of bounce back up and down, but at this point in time,
I think if you asked any Q.P.R fan who's your biggest rival, the vast majority will have the same answer, and that's Chelsea.
Okay.
There's a big rivalry between the clubs, and obviously it goes back a long time. And when we were back up into the Premier League after winning promotion in 10-11, the first time we played them at then Loftus Road in 11-12, it was quite an atmosphere. Q.P.R fans were really looking forward to that game for a very long time, and I think it actually took Chelsea by surprise, just the level of passion that they walked into and experienced at Q.P.R. So there's also rivalries with Brentford and Fulham, who are also in the area, but the big rival, if you ask Q.P.R fans, that would be Chelsea.
Why don't you kind of describe the atmosphere at Loftus Road? I know it's an old traditional English stadium. I think any football supporter has heard of it, who maybe hopefully, even if you had the chance to go to a match there, it seems pretty incredible.
Well, one of its big characteristics is actually that the fans are right on top
Hmm.
of the pitch. So it's one of those where if you're going to take a throw in, you've only got a
Yeah,
yard between the touchline and the terraces.
yeah,
Um, so there's very little space, and for an opposing player, I can only imagine it can be quite intimidating because, like I say, the fans are right on top of you. There's no sort of 5, 6, 10 foot gap between the pitch and the stands, and that really adds to the atmosphere and the noise that it generates. There've been some big games there, and yeah, when you're there for it, it's for those big games, it does get the juices flowing. That's for sure. It is a special stadium. It only holds 18,000, but it makes a heck of a lot of noise when it's full.
yeah. It's unfortunate because I think in the United States, a lot of those stadiums, former Major League Baseball stadiums, NFL stadiums, are kind of gone. And they built these monstrous stadiums like you're seeing at Tottenham and different places around now, West Ham. We kind of missed that aspect of it. And you being, head of media and communications, public address announcer, do you feel like you kind of feed off of that energy in any way?
Yeah, I think it's only natural that you get swept up in it
Yeah.
as such when it is a big atmosphere, a big game. There's lots of excitement. It gets you more excited and more. You get more into it if you like. So yeah, I mean, it definitely has an effect. Like any support that goes to a game, the bigger the game, the better the atmosphere, the more enjoyable the experience.
Yeah. And what's your day to day like? You're on the job. What exactly is it that you do at QPR?
It's one of those jobs where it genuinely is a case where no 2 days are the same. It is very, very different. So at the moment, we're in the transfer window at the moment. So the international transfer window has just closed as we're speaking. It closed at 11 p.m. last night on
Hmm.
Monday night, and we made a couple of new signings. We've made 8 signings in total during the transfer window. There's still 2 weeks left of the domestic transfer window, which means we can sign players from clubs in this country, but not internationally. So last night we were announcing our second signing, which was Chris Willock, who's joined us from Benfica. He's
Hmm.
formerly at Arsenal. He's joined us from Benfica. And we also signed Albert Adoma, who had just left Nottingham Forest previously, Middlesbrough and Cardiff most recently. And he's actually a big QPR fan. And
Cool.
it's always been his dream to play for QPR. He's 32 now, and he's been playing in the English Championship for the last 10 years. And for those listeners that don't know, the English Championship is one division below the Premier League. So if you win promotion from the division QPR playing, then you would be in the Premier League. And likewise, if you drop out of the Premier League, you drop into the Championship.
Hmm.
So for 10 years, Albert Adoma has been playing football in the Championship, playing against QPR, and now he's getting to play for QPR. And he was saying the other day, he was in the area and he went to buy a QPR top, and he thought, actually, I'll wait a week and I'll get it free when I sign for the club. So, yeah, so he's excited. But in answer to your question, yeah, no 2 days are the same. For instance, this morning we're doing Zoom calls with players, speaking with local schools,
Hmm.
giving them advice, doing a Q&A. We had Todd Kane did it yesterday. Macaulay Bonne, one of our new signings, did it this morning, giving advice to some younger players. Obviously, we have press conferences on a weekly basis with the manager to preview the upcoming game. At the moment, again, that's been done via Zoom. And aside from other external media requests, we also have our own internal media needs, whether that's our website, social media. We have our own club podcast called the Loftcast that we do on a weekly basis as well. And right now, one of the big challenges is communication around coronavirus and the impact that's having on supporters. Obviously, fans can't come to games at the moment here in England, but because it's such a fluid situation, it's constantly changing. We have to be constantly providing the latest information. Now, that information might only be accurate for a short period of time because the guidelines change and we have to react to that.
Hmm.
So that's the challenge. What I would say is QPR fans have been excellent in recognising it is such a complex situation they're very accepting of the challenges that are thrown up, and they can see that the club are doing their best to give them the information that they need, but also reacting to, like I say, what is a constantly changing situation.
No, and I think there's kind of some contention here in the United States, as I'm sure you've heard with COVID. And a lot of fans want to get back to the stadium. Is there any indication on this season? Obviously, it all has to do with COVID, how, we progress through the fall and winter. Are your hopes, maybe springtime, end of the season, that you get some capacity back?
It's impossible to put a timescale on it. It's certainly be hoped that fans can return sooner rather than later. We were very close. There were a couple of test matches that occurred, but then the guidelines here in this country changed and the testing stopped, and the proposed return of supporters was paused. So fans were actually due to return this month, and we were looking at fans potentially returning to us for our home game against Preston on the 21st of October, but that was put on hold by the changes in government. So that is a huge challenge. In answer to your question, when do we think fans will return? Hopefully sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, it's just impossible to put a genuine timescale on it.
What's it like being the public address announcer in an empty stadium?
It's interesting, actually. So you'll see some teams still use their PA on match days and others don't. So we had a conversation with our manager and spoke about it and said, it's a case of, do you want the PA to still be operational on a match day, or is it unnecessary? And he took the view, he said, well, while there's no fans in the stadium, it's not needed. So I haven't done any PA since just before the lockdown initially kicked in March. Okay. So we're or February actually. So we'll be waiting, and hopefully once fans return, then I'll be able to take up my PA duties once again. But it's certainly a very strange situation.
Yeah, a question to ask you for our listeners is, obviously we had talked just before this interview that it's very tough to break into the industry. How did you break in? More or less, how did you end up at Q.P.R? I know you worked for Millwall in the past and a couple other organizations. Why don't you go into a little bit of detail there?
Yeah, no problem. So I did a degree in journalism at university, and at university, I used to hate the phrase, it's who you know, not what you know. And the reason I hated that phrase was I felt that was out of my control, like that's luck. Yeah. So who you know, not what you know. Well, I'm working hard here to get the grades that I need, to get the qualifications I need, to be told, well, it's who you know, not what you've got. And what used to bug me was I felt I couldn't control that aspect. So it was lady luck whether you were going to benefit from that. I've since learned that's not the case. It is who you know, not what you know, but that isn't down to luck. That's down to networking and building those relationships and those contacts. From my point of view, it was actually, I was at my friend's birthday and I got speaking to his cousin, who was a magazine editor, a basketball magazine, and a very nice guy. And he said to keep in touch, which I did through my final year of uni. And fortunately for me, as I left uni, he was setting up a website for sportsmen and sportswomen. So it was basically official websites for initially footballers, but it grew beyond that. Okay. And he had some really big names as well, because he had built contacts. So we had Jamie Redknapp. We had Jamie's website. He was the captain of Liverpool at the time. We had Harry Redknapp, his dad, who was the manager of West Ham at the time. Yeah. We had Rio Ferdinand, who was still at West Ham at the time. We had a host of names, and we actually branched out into golf, rugby union as well. And that grew. So I worked there for 3 years, and then unfortunately the internet bubble burst, as the older generation of your listeners might remember. Yeah. And then the company ceased trading shortly after that. So I found myself with a reasonable amount of experience, but out of work. And I actually did what I would advise people not to do. And I sent an email out to 20 or 30 football clubs asking if there were any opportunities within their press office. And that's where I did get lucky. Crystal Palace got in touch with me. They were in the process of revamping their press department. And I went and I was interviewed by Terry Byfield, who was the head of media at the time there. and I worked at Crystal Palace for a couple of years. And then an opportunity in Millwall came up to be the program editor at Millwall, and I moved there. And like I was saying to you just before we started the podcast, with this industry, it's very incestuous. The biggest challenge is getting into the industry. Once you're in the industry, you build relationships, contacts, and then it's probably easier. It is easier to then move around once you've got into the industry, because people within the industry want to employ people who've got experience of working in the industry.
Sure.
Therein obviously poses a problem for people who are looking to get in. I was at Millwall for a couple of years as well, and then an opportunity came to work at Q.P.R, and that was in 2006. And I was fortunate enough to get the job here at Q.P.R, and I've been here for 14 years now.
That's an awesome story. And, one thing that kind of stuck with me is you said earlier today you're talking to school children. Community seems like a big piece of Q.P.R. Why don't you go into a little bit of detail about community and what it means to the club?
Yeah, that's like I was saying at the start, the role that Q.P.R plays in its community is big, and it's a role that the club's very proud of, and it takes very seriously. Andy Evans is the CEO of Q.P.R and the Community Trust, and he's worked at the club for about 212 years. He's been around the club forever. And yeah, he's a big Q.P.R fan, and he has that passion and that drive, as do all his team that he has. And the fans, the Q.P.R fans, are very proud of the club for the work it does in its community as well. And it's something that, like I say, that the club holds very importantly, and understands the importance of its role. And I have to say, the owners of the club as well, they're very, very community orientated, and that, so it's an extension of that as well. It's always been in place, but because it's the owners and the CEO Lee Hughes, it's their drive as well. Their vision, their strong belief. So that really helps to push it forward.
So one thing you could argue is that, a club is kind of nothing without its supporters, without its fans. And I remember back in 2014, I had the opportunity to travel to Germany, and I met a gentleman by the name of Ian Cox at the airport, who I believe you know. He actually at the time offered me the ticket to the match between Derby County in the playoff championship. Fortunately, I couldn't go, but that seemed like an incredible match. I saw the fans explode and erupt when Q.P.R was promoted. Has there ever been another time in your career, aside from that, or maybe it was that time, where you kind of lost your sense of time and just, lost your professionalism and just gone crazy,
Yeah. Yes.
I still regret not going to that game. I couldn't make it. It kills me, but.
Yeah, that was a big mistake on your part, Brian, I've got to say.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a prime example. That was the playoff final. So whichever team won that match would get promoted into the Premier League. So it's financially, it's the biggest domestic game in world football. It's huge. It's a huge game. And we were down to 10 men, and it was horrendous to watch because you just felt like you were waiting for Derby, who we were playing against. You were waiting for Derby to score. And we were just hanging on, and we were basically just hoping to get through to penalties at the end of extra time. But with a minute to go of normal time, Bobby Zamora scored for Q.P.R, and we won promotion. And so from our point of view, we needed to get pitch side, to get the content, to get on the pitch at the end of the game, to get the interviews. So myself and Ian Taylor, who was head of media at Q.P.R at the time, he since moved on. The pair of us were running down the stairs, but the game was still going on. It was in injury time. Yeah. So we're running down the stairs because we needed to be there for the reaction. My fear was, we're going to get down, Derby are going to have equalised, and then we've got to go back upstairs to watch extra time.
Yeah. So
me and Ian were having this row as we're running down the stairs. And I said, they're going to score. And he's saying, they're not. Let's get going. Thankfully, Ian was right, I was wrong. And we got pitch side just as the final whistle went. And then we did some post-match content. And it was amazing. It was a very, very special day. But yeah, there are plenty of examples where you get a little bit too excited or caught up in the moment. I mean, we had a situation where it was when we were in the Premier League and we were battling to stay up. And for those of you that are more familiar with the Premier League, you may remember the Sergio Aguero goal, which was actually against QPR. And that day we were
Yeah.
to stay in the Premier League. And thankfully, because of a result elsewhere that day, we stayed up. Had the result elsewhere between Bolton and Stoke not gone our way, that Aguero goal would have relegated us in the process. And actually, some of our players on the pitch thought that goal had relegated us. And then they found out, no, it's okay because the other result's gone our way. So, look, it's a very passionate game. And if there are people who work within it who can say they don't get caught up in the passion, then they're either liars or more professional than I am, because I'm certainly guilty of doing it.
I think one thing the QPR supporters will like, and I know you mentioned it's about who you know. I had the opportunity, this is very just random coincidence, to run into Andy Appleby, who is the old owner of Derby County. He's actually Michigan based. I reminded him of the goal back in 2014 when I met him. So, very
that was a short conversation.
Strange circumstance. Yeah, right. I won't get into it, but I did remind him of the goal, told him the story. And I said, I find it very strange that I'm running into you today because, I told him the story. He wasn't too happy, but
I can understand.
Yeah. So let's talk about promotion and relegation. It seems like the transfer window was successful, or it seems to be right now with the players that QPR brought in. Do you see any chance of being promoted this year or maybe in the next upcoming seasons? What do you think?
The great thing about the championship is at the start of the season, there are 24 teams in the championship, and probably 16, if not more, think that this year could be their year to finish in the top 6 and therefore have a chance of winning promotion to the Premier League. It's such a competitive division. Perhaps in the Premier League, you can have a good stab at who's going to be in the top 6 year in, year out. You just can't pull that off in the Championship because you can get such surprises. Teams you think will be struggling to avoid relegation end up winning promotion. It is that sort of division. So it's just impossible to say. It'd certainly be the wish to get back into the Premier League. We've had 3 years in the Premier League in recent years. So it would certainly be the wish. Whether it will happen this year or it's impossible to say, but that's certainly the hope. And we have Jeff Cameron, of course, who's
big Jeff Cameron fan.
Yeah, so a lot of your listeners, I'm sure, will know of Jeff Cameron. He's our captain at QPR and a real leader. So who knows? Maybe we'll get some American fans looking out for Jeff Cameron in QPR this season.
I did take my Liverpool scarf down before the interview, but
I know I can still see the ripped wallpaper.
It's one of those walls you can't hammer anything in, so I had to tape it up. But yeah, you have a fan in me, So I definitely will start supporting from afar.
Great.
Another question I did want to ask is kind of about the championship grind. I think that it's 46 matches. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
That's crazy compared to the Premier League. I don't think a lot of American fans or the audience really realizes that. What is that like for 46 matches, just grinding day to day?
Well, that's it. I mean, it is exactly that. It's a grind. If you look at December, that's the busiest period of games. We've actually got 8 games in 29 days. So it's a lot of matches, and that is the challenge. And that's why the transfer window is actually so important. It's not about the 11 players that play. You need a squad because people pick up injuries, suspension, loss of form, etc. So people way above my pay grade have to make those calls to build that squad. But that's why squads are so important in the Championship, because you can have a very good starting 11, but if you don't have that strength in depth, because of the grind of the Championship, it's going to be really difficult for you. But having said that, as football fans, we all love watching games of football. So it's great because it's harder for the players. They're the ones that have got to go out there and perform. And like I say, over the Christmas time, they'll be knackered. But as football fans, we get to see plenty of football at least. It's difficult at the moment in the current situation where it's via streams and watching online, but there's certainly plenty of football to watch in the Championship.
2 more questions before we wrap up. I think that it's so interesting, the promotion and relegation system. In fact, I always argue to kind of incorporate it in specific sports here in the United States. What do you think about the U.S. structure when it comes to playoffs and it comes to just kind of like the teams that are finishing in the bottom of the standings really have nothing to play for?
See, that's the difficulty. That's why the playoffs are so good in terms of in the championship. You can be ninth, 10th, 11th, and there can still be that hope come February, March time. If we have a good run, we can sneak in.
Sure.
At the other end of the table as well, you've got the three teams who are going to get relegated, and more often than not, going into the last 3 or 4 games, you'll have 5, 6, 7 clubs who are looking over their shoulder, knowing they could be one of those 3. So there's always something to play for in the championship, right up until the last few weeks of the season. When I was actually at Crystal Palace were just above the relegation zone in December, and we actually went on a crazy run in the second half of the season, nicked into the playoffs, and then won the playoffs to get promoted to the Premier League. And you look back and go, wow, we were fighting relegation at Christmas, and by May we're in the Premier League, because there's always that hope with the playoffs. It keeps the season alive for so many clubs.
No, it's definitely fascinating to watch over here. I personally, from the days I have seen the championship matches, I enjoy it. All the clubs are so classic. There's typically, it just seems like, regardless if you're in the Premier League Championship or League One, all formidable clubs, organizations that I think really kind of make the English structure the way it is. One last question here for my listeners. It's kind of like you have almost the dream job, in football. One could say, just your position right now with Q.P.R. What advice do you have for any listeners who want to get into the media side of whether it's soccer, football or baseball, basketball, whatever it may be?
What I'd say is, the who you know, not what you know, is true, and you have to understand you can affect that. I would absolutely advise against sending random emails to loads of organisations saying, are there any vacancies? And the reason I say that is because, well, one, because everyone does that. So it's just, you're not standing out. And the second reason is you're almost putting it on. So say it's a football club you contact, you're almost putting it on the football club to find you a role. Sure. What you need to do is flip it. So you find the role and you tell the football club about the role that exists. What I mean by that is, say, for instance, we have our under-18s. Now, when we play first team games of football, that can often coincide with under-18s games. So our resources are around the first team naturally. So we aren't in a position to cover our under-18s. So you could contact the club and say, love the coverage you do around the first team. Start with a compliment. Everyone loves a compliment. However, I've noticed you're not able to cover the under-18s to the same level, which I'm assuming is down to a resource issue. I would love to help in that regard. Can I come along, do match reports? I'll send you the report for your website, and I will gain experience by doing that. So that works on so many levels. One, you've found the issue, that you've found the problem and the solution. It works for us because you're going to go cover those games, send the report to us so we can upload to the website. So it's good content and it's easy from our side. And it works for you because, one, obviously you're building experience, but more importantly than that, you're actually getting your foot in the door. So then hypothetically down the line, if the football club you're at gets promoted to the Premier League or is in a position to expand, or someone leaves the press department, you think, okay, we need to recruit someone. Well, this guy has been working covering our under-18s for 6 months. He or she is super reliable, trustworthy, provides great content, and they say, yeah, I'm interested. I want to be interviewed for the job. Well, that person has already got a foot up on all the other candidates because you've been working with them already. So that's one thing. And the second thing I'd say is, everyone would love to work in the Premier League or right at the top end of the football pyramid, but the opportunities come further down. So look towards the lower level. So if you're talking in England, look towards the National League, which is 5 tiers down from the Premier League. Contact those clubs because they will have very limited resources. So look, I'd love to come in and help you out. Can I cover your 23s? Can I do this? Can I do that? Again, you get your foot in the door. Then if an opportunity comes higher up the footballing pyramid, you can apply for that and you've got a reference. I've been working in the National League with this person. This is their head of media and he's going to say lovely things about me. So again, you've used that time to one, build contacts and build experience, but most importantly, to get your foot in the door. So that's the most important thing. And to have an attitude that's beyond, if you're asked to do A and B, for instance, if you're asked to do a match report, do the match report, but don't think that's all I have to do. That's all you've been asked to do, but what more can you do? Actually, my dad's got a really nice stills camera. I'm going to bring that and take some photos. Send it through. Here's a match report. By the way, I borrowed my dad's camera, and here's some nice stills images. Brilliant. Or afterwards, player X scored a hat trick, and I was stood by him, asked him for a couple of words. Here's an interview. So don't just do the basics. Do the basics as a must, but always have your eyes open about what else can I do.
Gotcha. No, I think that's great advice. And then if you're lucky enough to latch onto a team, it looks like you get great apparel. Is that a Q.P.R polo? Because I see the lines here.
Yeah, so
it's pretty fresh. There we go. Yeah,
I'm at the training ground at the moment.
Pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool, Paul. No, and that's great advice. I think our listeners will definitely, I think it's tough being in the United States and maybe breaking into the English football structure. But once again, your main advice is to persevere, and no matter what you're doing to break into the industry, I think that's a must. But Paul, once again, thank you so much for your time. I think our listeners will really enjoy it. I had a great time talking with you. Wish you the best of luck.
No worries, Brian. Enjoyed it as well. Thanks very much for reaching out.
Thank you. Once again, that was Paul Morrissey with Q.P.R. If you enjoyed today's episode of the S.B.R. podcast, please follow me on Twitter at SBR_podcast. I'm also on Instagram at the same handle, SBR_podcast. And if you feel the need to provide any further feedback, please visit www.sportsbusinessreview.com, the official home of the S.B.R. podcast. You can now also follow all of our content on YouTube at Sports Business Review. Don't forget to subscribe. Once again, my name is Brian McDonough, and have a great weekend, everyone.